Hi, David.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Kat.
How are you doing? I hope well, and I'm very excited for the session. And David will be sharing about the blockchain in defense of our freedom. And I'm personally very excited for the session to hear about the insights and such an amazing topic. Welcome, David. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I hope audio and everything is good. You can hear me well?
Yes, all good.
Perfect.
All clear.
Well, thanks that I may share my time with you, and I hope I have something to share and at least to spark a thought or two. So let me share my screen and jump right into. So can you all see that? Perfect. So my topic today that I chose is something that I am personally really passionate about. It's my topic of freedom. I'm going to tell you in a minute why this is such an important topic for me in my life, and I think why it's so important for all of us in general. And I think this ties in wonderfully with the overall arching topic of crypto, of Ethereum as one of the biggest foundations for decentralized ecosystems, and how trusted third parties that we interact every day without probably knowing it to the extent how this could be a potential threat. Now, do I want to finger point today or tell that these organizations are a threat to my or your life? That's not the point. I just want to state the facts and spark a little thought, because my mission usually in life, but specifically for today, is to challenge you all on your state of freedom. That means, where do you think are you standing at? Are you really free in the way that you want to be, or are you not? So that's my biggest thought that I want to spark today. All you need to know about me is that I'm a fighter for freedom, and I fight for my clients, for myself, and everybody else. And I work with a lot of organizations and people, and most of the people that I interact with, and that may sound a bit harsh, they kind of, how can I say that? They are in a state of sleep in denying the actual truth about their freedom in life and about the people that work for them. So at the core is leadership. And I think this is also why UNIT does a big job in taking this leadership, so we all can take a little part in that. So let's jump right into that. I've been in the crypto space since early 2017, first just as an investor, I think as everybody else. And for a year or so now, in my little space, in my little thing that I can do, I am helping others to get onboarded in the ecosystem. So we train investors and crypto newbies how to start from scratch without making all the stupid mistakes that I made over the past 5 years, and I guess everybody else also. So the question here is, this is a statement that I have from one of my mentors some years back, which really stings to me. It was, everybody wants freedom, but very few have the freedom of choice. Now, what does that mean? What's even the difference? I guess we all can choose between certain things in our lives, between bad and good, or bad and even more bad. But there's only a few out there that actually have the choice between the choices they can choose. And I hope you get the distinction. So moving forward in my life, my goal is to have more freedom of choice, because I get to choose every day, but my freedom of choice may be limited. Just going to hook real quick in why this is such a fascinating topic for me. I was born in the eastern part of Germany, in the former German democratic part of the country. And the inside, this was where I lived, right? Somebody had the brilliant idea in 1962 to build a wall around the country that I lived, and it stayed up there till 1991, and I lived inside that. So this is where my freedom need sparks from, that I don't want to be having or experience any of this anymore. The thing is, nowadays, people don't need to erect physical walls like they did back then in Germany. Nowadays, you can erect any wall you want via technology. And this is some of the things that people probably might not even be aware of that. And most of our society really today functions based on third trusted parties. And the ecosystem in itself is just set up to do that. So why is that an issue? And let's talk about this. Why is that a problem? It's because in the back, there is a database to really anything. You probably have in mind thousands of applications where this is. And in order for me, for you, for the whole society to run, we need these databases. There is just an example. I was on a trip for the past week in south of Europe. And if we ask ourselves, who are these trusted third parties? These are organizations that we trust every day, right? If I would take half of them out, I really couldn't work anymore. If I take Amazon out, if I take Apple out, if I take any of these, and these are just a representation of what we do, behind all of these, and this is a small selection, there is tons and tons of data that's being mined and mined and mined, unless if this would be gone, we wouldn't really function. And if you think about it, my journey towards the south of Europe started with filling out tons of forms, COVID testing, vaccine testing, signing up for pre-flight check-in. I had to upload all my data. I went to the airport with the train, so they have my data from the train. I get onto the airplane. I get out of the airplane, I go to the rental station. I leave a trail there. I check into my Airbnb. I spend money with my credit card in the shop. I'll communicate with my family back home via the database of Facebook, via WhatsApp. You get the idea. I'll leave a mile-long trail of data that are all stored in the database. And we do this every day, 10,000-fold without sometimes even being aware of what we are doing there at the end of the day. And this is why this is so important. I just want you to make you aware of that fact, which I think you are. So until now, what is the key message? I think this is very important without knowing that, is that these trusted third parties that we so easily engage with, and don't get me wrong, I use a lot of them because they make my life easier. They make it more convenient. I live out in the Alps, so there's not much retail stores. So I have to rely on organizations like Amazon to provide the products that I need and that I wouldn't find anywhere else. I would have to spend much time to do that. But the core of the fact is that these TTPs decide what rights I have, right? This is fact. And I want you to understand the idea of that. And this also goes from totally minor things to very important things. And this sounds a bit abstract. So let's ask ourselves, what is the problem with that? What is the problem? The problem is that we take this entire ecosystem of data and data collection for granted. And we saw just a few weeks back when we had the outage of Facebook and WhatsApp, what actually is being caused by that. And it's tremendous. It's absolutely tremendous. And this is something we have to keep an eye on. And I would like to ask again, what is the problem with that? And the problem is that's actually two problems with that. The problem is that we have a micro and a macro problem. I'm going to jump into that, and I just want to make it as specific as it is for that. The micro problem is that these organizations that they trend to be anti-competitive. Now, what does that even mean? Let's take the example of Amazon. And by no means, I don't want to bash Amazon. It's a wonderful organization, but they have massive power by now. I don't know if anybody of you still remembers the Toys R Us store, an international brand that bought that sold toys and all kind of things for kids to play with. They had at a time issues with shipment. So they hired Amazon to effectively take care of that. And in the end, they handed over the entire plate. They paid them $50 million per year to do their fulfillment. And a few years later, Amazon knew more about their clients, what they bought, what they did not buy, the key products and everything else. So that then Amazon started himself to list these same products. And a few years later, they were out of business. Now, is that a bad thing? I'm just stating things. This is usually what happens to organizations when they deal with Amazon and other organizations. And this is something we have to be aware of as well. The other problem is that when you look at these organizations that I just mentioned, you might have heard the term FANG or FANG. They all do the same thing. Their biggest asset is not you and me, it's data. And these data, I entrust them with them, otherwise I wouldn't use their products. but they can be hijacked. And that is the second problem. And most regulators out there, we see this strongly against the crypto scene right now. I don't need to be touching on that space, but our regulators, lawmakers, people in our states, wherever we live, they try to solve this issue, which is a 21st century problem, with 19th century solutions, which is by telling them you can only sell this amount, you can do it only at that price, and so on and so forth. So that is very important, and this will not work. And I found a really cool guy who is effectively a Twitter guy. He calls himself 6529. That is because he owns the CryptoPunk 6529. And he just said, if I should ever be a regulator at that point, how to solve that micro issue with these organizations becoming so big and anti-competitive, I would simply force these companies and agencies to provide first-class access to the underlying data. The rest, the market take care of themselves, and everything would roll out. But you know how realistic that is, that Amazon or anything else would effectively do that. It's almost close to zero, right? So that's not going to happen under any circumstances. And as I said earlier, the biggest issue with all this is that they can be hijacked. By hijacked, I mean that there's external forces, either people with guns or with cool hackers that can take advantage of all these data and have the tendency to then dictate on what we can do. And as a simple example, this might sound a bit abstract. When you were 10 years ago and went to a big city, you would simply just jump into a taxi at the airport, or you would just drive around with a taxi. It was by definition, a perfectly decentralized market. The taxi driver didn't know anything about the client. They didn't know who would come. It was just on the go, hop off, hop on. Nowadays, if you do that, and you don't use a taxi, use an Uber. You know what happens? Uber has your database, knows who you are, knows where you are, from where to go you are, knows what payment you do, and even where you come from, because the app tracks your moving about, so they know exactly where you are. So this is different. And if somebody, let's call him a dictator or anything else of that sort, would like to exclude me, you, or anything from driving with an Uber, there's nothing we can do about it. They just delete your access to the Uber app. End of story, right? You then have to go something else. And this is just a symbol for every ecosystem out there that is based on data and which is linked to one of the trusted third parties. And again, this is something we should all be aware of at any time. One thing that's also fundamental is that I see, when you kind of zoom out and take the macro scale of things, that everybody in news and media, and I'm very little exposed to that, so I apologize my ignorance, but the day-to-day risks that we all are being told are crime, terrorism. These were especially in the early 2000s with 9/11. So that entire decade was predominantly influenced by this fear of that. We have tax evasion that's been fought against. We have viruses now lately since 2020, money laundering, you can name it, really anything that is out there. And what nobody does look at is existential risks. As a matter of fact, dictators. Now, dictators today probably, as you think, don't come in the same form or shape that probably we know them from. And I just thought a little selection of the biggest dictators that were out there. You probably know all of them. This was what was hammered in my brain, who these people are. Now, my grandfather, I think it was born in 1925. If I would go back and ask him in 1940 or 1939, actually, hey, do you think that these issues here actually cause a massive problem for societies? That tax evasion, viruses after the Spanish flu at the time, money laundering, that this is a big issue? And the answer is no, because it's people like these who hijack entire systems, and by doing so, cut the system. This is what causes destruction on a cultural level, on an economic level, on effectively all levels. And this is something that we might be facing as well. Again, I'm not trying to scare myself and others. This is just facts when you look at how things work out at the moment. So my fear is, and the question here is, is the macro problem potentially that people are sleepwalking into a very, very centralized world that we are facing. And I know you all know China. Some people might even be from China, so please no offense taken, but effectively, as a matter of fact, China is a centralized system. China is a country that leaves very little freedom to individuals and only grants freedom to groups of people and by the laws that they actually make. And I don't know how you see that. I see it since 2020. We have a massive, massive shift also in the West, Europe, the US, from a further decentralized into centralized systems. We have a WHO, we have everybody going in the same way. We have a centralized organization that's government on an international phase. So I really do believe that we're walking into that. Now, you might think it's like, why the hell is he talking about this? Actually, here we're talking about Ethereum today. Bear with me for 1 second. I will close the loop in a minute for us to talk about it in a second. When we hit the pause button right here and take what we know so far, then we know a few facts effectively from what I've just talked about. You may agree or not agree, but this is what I've done so far. So number one is, thanks to Mr. Satoshi, who invented Bitcoin, and the white paper that was just 8 pages long, we have solved the issue of decentralized consensus, which is important. Otherwise, organizations wouldn't be have something to agree on. And that is the difference between a bank, which is a centralized ledger, and effectively a blockchain. So the idea is not new, and we have this out since 2009, and it is functioning every single day ever since. Yet, we still every day face totally centralized consensus mechanisms in really everything we do. And that is scary. And that goes back to what I said earlier. It's these centralized data storage that make this happen. And the third issue is, and I've lengthy talked about it, is that we have these trusted third parties that cause these two big types of problems. That one is probably underestimated and the other one probably is not. So where do I take this from here? I'd like to introduce, and this is where it's going to get interesting, and I'd love to talk to you about it in the remaining time after I'm done, because this is really something that I like to speak with you about. I may be completely wrong with this, but I found again a quite intriguing thought, and I had about 4 weeks to think about this, and I thought I have to share that with you. Everybody of you knows probably NFTs, right? Non-fungible tokens. And what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Write that in the chat when you think about NFTs. What's the first thing you think about? Yeah, so cats, art, apes, and all of that. Some snails, some little animals, and anything of that sort. And that really is the case that we all think about NFTs in that space, because this is the effectively first addressable market that people came up with, which is that art space. The question is, what's the next phase of NFTs? And here is the link to Ethereum, because Ethereum is the biggest home of NFTs out there, apart from Solana, but it's not that big so far. So again, for those of you who might not be so deep in, what is an NFT and what's the qualities that could really make a difference? It could be a game changer for us when it comes to freedom and to blockchain and all of that. It's completely decentralized, that's for sure. Everything that an NFT is constitutionally protected as free speech. So that also could not be classified as a security or any of that sorts. When you see the SEC in the US and everybody else trying to kind of fight against that by the means they have, it also represents the nuance, the little glimpse of what can happen, how the world could be which is non-fungible is very important. Plus, it can be built, and this could be the future, can be built to build decentralized social organizations. I think this is where this is the biggest application that NOAS sees right now, because we are so art focused at the point. So this guy, as I said earlier, really had a core thought in here. And he said, and I think this is a very big statement, we all make a massive mistake, and I might still do that, but at least until I heard this theory or idea or thought that he had, is that we all are thinking that the actual scope of NFTs is art, but it's a mistake. We're totally wrong about that. So where can this go? And he has presented this very cool graph of showing if you want, this is the evolution of NFTs, how it could be and how it likely can be. We are at a really early stage, right? When you usually see the adoption curve of innovation, we are at a very early stage of early adopters. That means we've started with collectibles art. I just heard from Zip that, the gaming factor in learning, this is probably where we already see some application. And this is the only application that we can envision today, because this is where the industry choose to do that. But I'm afraid that the NFT market will just probably behave like the incumbents that we know from other industries, that we will have centralized, financialized payoffs, and they're going to just spoil the whole thing because it's just being over leveraged. And we see this right now. There was an article out last week from a study that was just published, I think, early, just a week back on October 21st, that 80% of all ERC 721 tokens on the Ethereum blockchain are in the ownership and control of 16% of all Ethereum wallets. Now, again, that doesn't sound too much like decentralization. And I think this is only happening at the moment because a very few people and a very small group is moving into that space. Because let's be honest, at least in my case, art, collectible, and things like this, which just tend to be a sense, and now hundreds of Ethereum worth. This is a very unique space and it attracts a lot of people that just gamble. Now, if you take this forward, at least to this idea, it moves into brands. So an NFT could represent a brand, could protect you from somebody who would steal your brand. It can take aspects of a culture. It can be used in a metaverse. That means in a totally different flight height that we see this today. It can represent off-chain assets. Now, it all started with Decentraland, where you could buy land in a decentralized space online in an NFT platform. Now you own Times Square, New York as an NFT. Well, that's interesting. You can do marketing around all of that. But if you move into off-chain assets, my land that I probably own, something that you own, and this is totally crazy what this all could be. And then we move into a governance off-chain environment that could be in 10 years from now or even earlier. And this is where the whole thing really gets interesting and totally intriguing. And this is the role that NFTs on the back of Ethereum could play to give us that freedom that the trusted third parties might not do. So the summary towards that is that the addressable market for NFTs is not the subset of art. Yes, it is a subset, but it's nowhere where it should be. But the point is, NFTs will be used by organizations and people to build organizations and communities. And this is probably a big leap forward. And unlike a database that we talked about earlier, they are public. They are totally uncensorable. And this could be the key that gives us the freedom. So to wrap this up, there's one battle that we all have to win, which is the one that's quite big. And everybody, again, is fighting against it. We have big movements in the US. We have big movements in Europe against our right to hold non-custodial wallets. That means we all at the moment, probably who is a bit longer in the ecosystem, we all hold non-custodial wallets. That means we hold ownership or know what is in our wallet. But regulators don't want that. They only want wallets where they control the access and the outgoes. That means a bank or any trusted third party should hold your wallet custodial for you and then knows what goes in and what goes out. This must under no circumstances happen, because if this happens, it's probably game over. So we need this as fundamental right to hold what we already have, and then everything is possible. What is the takeaway here from my little thought experiment that I shared with you? Telling yourself, what is your state of freedom? I think that's something you have to take a bag, have a tea or a cup of coffee, and think about your state of freedom and where you have touch points that may be a little bit tricky. Second thing is, what could be a threat? Do you think this is a potential threat, that being hijacked, that we move towards more centralization than we actually all want? Because we are in a decentralized space, but the world around us is more and more centralized. And the third one is, how can I myself help the adoption of things like NFTs, of anything else that moves us, people, societies, organizations more towards that space. And I want to leave you with one last quote. It's actually from Benjamin Franklin from the late 1800s. And he said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety, which we all do, deserve neither liberty nor safety." With that, I say thank you so much, and hope I could spark one or two thoughts, and I'm happy to have a little discussion for the remaining time.